Greetings everyone, and welcome to this special bonus video with Mirabai Starr and guest faculty Cynthia Jurs, entitled Earth Treasure Vases. This is your host, Lisa Bonis with the Shift Network. For those of you who are not familiar with our guest faculty, allow me to share her brief bio with you. Cynthia Jurs is a Buddhist teacher in the Order of Interbeing who received Dharmacharya transmission to teach from Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh in 1994. Also a practitioner of Tibetan Buddhism, she has studied with many great masters and spent much time in retreat, practicing in both the Vajrayana and Zen Buddhist tradition for 30 years. She's the guiding teacher at the Open Way Sangha in Santa Fe, New Mexico, leading meditation groups and teaching retreats in a unique blend of engaged Buddhism and sacred activism. Please join me in welcoming Mirabai Starr and Cynthia Jurs.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Cynthia, so much for joining us. I know you are literally on the brink of the journey of a lifetime back to Nepal, where 30 years ago or so, you received this incredible transmission of the Earth Treasure Vase practice that we're going to be talking about today. So it's an extremely auspicious time for us to have you and for me to have this conversation with you, my soul sister. I first met Cynthia. Actually, you guys, I have never met Cynthia in person, although I live in Taos and she lives in Santa Fe, so we're literally an hour and a half apart, but somehow our paths have never crossed in person. Now I think they will, but we have known of each other's work for a long time, and I know I have certainly felt a great resonance. And then, I don't know, maybe a year or so ago, I was in Costa Rica with the Global Women's Peace Initiative doing a retreat with youth activists from all over Latin America. And the last day we wanted to do some kind of ceremony. And I thought, Cynthia Jurs, I'm gonna reach out to her and see if she has any guidance for us. We're in the jungles of Costa Rica. And I managed to get an internet connection. I reached out to her. She responded right away with such love and generosity for all of these youth activists from all over, and gave us some great ideas. And we had this beautiful, beautiful ceremony before we sent them back into the jungles and mountains where they all live and risk their lives on behalf of Mother Earth. And so I felt after that, like I have to actually connect more with this woman because she represents everything that matters to me. So thanks again, Cynthia, for being with us.
Thank you, Mirabai.
Well, I have a couple of questions for you, and let's just kind of see how the conversation unfolds from there. So my first question for you, Cynthia, is, and this will be a conversation, so if you have questions for me, that's fine too. And if you don't, that's also fine. But my first question is, what is this Earth Treasure Vase project, this spiritual practice? How did it come to you? And yeah, give us a little background, and then I'd like to kind of ask you how it's morphed and changed and revealed itself over the years, the decades since it's been with you.
Well, thank you, Mirabai. It's really wonderful to be here, and just to respond first personally to say how appreciative I am of your sisterhood on this path of global healing and collective awakening and relationship to Mother Earth. So I'm really delighted to be here, and I thank you so much for having me, and really wonderful to be able to share this story with all of you who are listening. So yeah, it was back in 1990, so it was 28 years ago, almost 30 years ago, that I had this opportunity to go and meet an old wise man in a cave in Nepal. And I had understood him to be 106 years old. He was the teacher of a Sherpa Lama that was a friend of someone that I knew who had been invited to meet this old Lama and invited me to go along. And I jumped at the opportunity, I actually kind of implored him to let me come. And I didn't really realize what I was getting myself into at the time, but I just knew that I had to go. And I was walking up the path of the highest mountains in the world to this remote hermitage cave where the old Lama lived. His name was Kushuk Mangdun, otherwise known as Charak Rinpoche, because the area where he's from is known as Charak. And I was walking up the path realizing, wow, I have this opportunity to ask a question of the old wise man in the cave. What am I going to ask him? You know, I didn't really even quite think about it ahead of time. And I was walking up the path realizing this was really a moment in my life and that I needed to make the most of it, not only for myself, but also for everyone else. And what came to me was my concern about what's happening to the earth and how much I love the earth and this life and the web of life and the beauty of this planet. And back then, even, you know, 30 years ago, it was obvious that things were changing. I live in New Mexico as you do, and I live across the Rio Grande Valley from Los Alamos National Laboratory, which is where the first atomic bomb was created. And I was really waking up at that time to the legacy of radioactive waste and what this is doing to the web of life. And that was part of my motivation in asking him, what can we do to bring healing and protection to the earth? And that was my question. And so I carried that question up the path, and eventually, after living with him for a couple of weeks, I had the chance to sit down and talk with him. And I explained radioactive waste. I explained what was happening in the world because, of course, he's never been out of his region. But he knew, you know, enough to know what was happening, and I'm sure he knew on many levels. Eventually he said to me, even just one person can make a difference in the whole area around where they live. And then he said, but you need to get these Earth Treasure Vases and you need to put them in the ground and they'll do that work. And my rational mind kind of went, right, how is a little clay pot filled with prayers and symbolic offerings and planted in the earth going to address something like radioactive waste or any of the other countless issues that are in such dire need of transformation and healing? And the other part of me thought, well, okay, this is what's being given to me. Where can I get them? And so he directed us to another monastery nearby where we could ask for them to be made. And we went there, and the Lama there said, oh, yes, 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 how many would you like? And again, my mind just sort of shut down because I didn't know whether to say 700 or 7,000 or 7, you know, and I said, I don't know, 25. And he said, oh, fine, fine, fine. And then we began to talk about how to get them and the fact that they would need to be made and then shipped or carried to me in the United States. So he ended up suggesting that many sacred substances and relics and medicines be mixed into the clay of the pots and then crafted and consecrated and then given to us to fill and seal and bury, which was really a radical departure from how it's done according to the tradition to date, because normally these would be made and filled with very specific offerings by the lamas inside the monasteries behind the closed doors, and maybe we would receive one to take somewhere. So this was kind of an interesting development in the whole thing. And Lama Tsultrim Zangpo, who's my spiritual friend who took me there originally, whose teacher was this Charak Rinpoche, he oversaw the crafting of them and gathered hundreds of relics from all the different lineages to mix into the clay. And so even without anything going into them from us, the pots really have great medicine power. And they were, I received 30 of them at the time, but the gentleman I was traveling with asked for 108 smaller ones, which now are forming the second generation of treasure vases. So over the years, I took me about, about 20 years to, accomplish, maybe a little more, 25 years to accomplish the vases that I had originally received, going all over the world to create a global mandala of healing and protection for the earth. And we, make relations with the indigenous elders of the lands that we're visiting, with the activists who are doing the work to turn our prayers into action, and just with regular folks, And the other thing about the practice that has been unique to the way we've been carrying it out, since they were not filled and sealed by the lamas, but given to us empty, so to speak. And I asked at the time, I said, don't I need to go into retreat according to the tradition and learn the practice and, become realized and then do it? That's how they so often do things in Tibetan Buddhism. And they told me repeatedly, no, just put them in the ground. They'll do the work. Mm. And so I had to trust that these little clay pots were, larger and more capable than I might have thought. And I just followed my nose. And so because they were open, we were allowed to make our own offerings. And so we leave them open and take them into these other communities and countries and cultures, and invite the people there to make their own offerings that are meaningful for them. And in that way, the vases have come alive for our times and for the cultures that they are going to, as opposed to being something very Tibetan Buddhist that, no one would really understand unless you became a Tibetan Buddhist. So it's really broken new ground, and I feel has brought the terma, which it's a, revealed teaching of Tibetan Buddhism that is very much obviously meant for these times. And so now I finished the last of the original treasure vases a few years ago, and now we're in the process of passing on the practice with the second generation of vases to people who want to learn the practice and take it where it needs to go. So maybe I'll stop there and see where you'd like to take us next.
I've read this story, I've heard this story, but just hearing it again now, it just fills my heart. And it's so simple and you're so clear. You're one of those beings that's blessed with a very clear dharma or path in this world. So many people are scrambling about trying to find out what's theirs. And what I love about your story is that you didn't plan this. It's not like I'm going to be an Earth Treasure Vase leader. You had no idea what that was. So it came to you, and that's beautiful. And I'm sure there was some resistance initially. I mean, you described it. There was your Western scientific mind saying, how's this going to do anything? I loved how Stephen Dinan, the founder of the Shift Network, described you in the intro call to this course, or described the work. He said it's acupuncture for the earth, which I know is a term you've used too, and that kind of actually makes sense because that's an ancient system that is grounded in real results. Yeah. But I guess where I want to go, one of the things that really struck me today, Cynthia, is this idea of leaving the vessels open. Mm-hmm. As a metaphor, in some ways, I mean, for you, it's a very real thing. The metaphorical implications just are flooring me right now, because I think that that's what's happening with the feminine in this world. Somehow this Rinpoche and the beings surrounding him understood that a new wave of consciousness and dharma, teachings, truth is emerging, and the vessel needs to be open so that we can fill it with our own prayers relevant to the actual circumstances of our times. And I think that's what's happening with the feminine. We don't need to beg the patriarchy to let us speak. The feminine energy is rising, and the men who are in charge, the Rinpoches and the lamas and the priests and the rabbis, are all, not all, but in fact many are not, but many are saying, here is an open vessel that comes through our lineage.
Yeah.
Take it, because you know what to do with it, and we need you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that is really one of the keys, I think, that we leave the vessel open, and it allows for connections to be made and offerings to come forth and prayers to be given, and so much more, you know, for people to engage. If the vessel had come to them sealed, it'd be like, oh, wow, that's nice little clay pot, pretty looking, you know, whatever. Yeah, okay, but it requires belief in something from somewhere else. And I don't have any interest in going into some culture and telling them what to believe in. You know, I want to go and make an offering, honor and respect the cultures and communities that we are going to. It's not for me to say what they need for their healing, you know, but I mean, of course, I can recognize that in Congo, the forests are being cut down, the earth is being raped, the women are being raped, and they need us to direct our prayers and intentions, you know, in a way of healing there. But when the vessel is open, then they can make their own prayers, they can make their own offerings. And when we do that, we connect with what we care about most deeply. And when we connect with what we care about most deeply and offer that and, you know, form that intention, then a whole flood of activities starts to move through us to actualize those prayers and intentions. And that's the power of it, you know, because anyway, I think that may say it right there, you know.
Well, can you give us an example, a story about one or more of the places that you've taken this practice to around the world, places of conflict, places of environmental devastation?
Yeah, you know, it takes a different form every single place. There is no formula, and that's another very feminine dynamic, right? We can't figure this out. There's no right way. It's just to be present in the moment with what is happening. So, you know, yes, everywhere I've gone, what's happened has been so different. And it's just an example of that particular location, that particular need, etc. But, you know, the most tangible example really comes from when I took the treasure vase to Liberia, which was actually the first country in Africa that I took one of the treasure vases. Liberia, I didn't even know where Liberia was when I first went there. And of course, Liberia has had a very bad civil war. It was a really big mess. There were you know, terrible things to recover from. The war had ended, and it was actually the women who stopped the war. The story is quite extraordinary if you don't know it. And there's a film called Pray the Devil Back to Hell. And it's a story about the women who stopped the war in Liberia. Muslim and Christian women coming together to pray, to sing, to dance, to fast, to not no longer cook or do the laundry or even have sex with their husbands until this war was over. And they didn't, you know, they just basically they hung in there until they got what they were asking for. It's a great story. And I met a number of the women and men, including one former general who was a commander of the rebel troops and child soldiers and everything else. And I was invited to bring a treasure vase to Liberia, to the worst fought area of the war. And I really had no idea how it would be accepted. When I got there, which was, it's a whole story in and of itself, but we had to go into a ritual ceremony to invite the ancestors to whether they would accept the vase, whether it was good for the community, and where it should be buried and all of those things. And I was kind of on the edge of my seat wondering if this was going to happen or not. But of course it did. The ancestor that came through, one of the women, as they were in trance, said, yes, this is very good. And so we proceeded, and people came from 3 countries because they all shared a border in that region, and their fighting was everywhere. So it was Liberia, Guinea, and Sierra Leone. And elders came from all 3 places for this ceremony, and then all the leaders of the community locally, and then regular people. And so there must have been 500 people at that closing ceremony, everyone just, you know, praying for peace. And they put their offerings into the vase, again, that were appropriate for their place, you know. And I mean, it took hours to go around the circle with the vase and everyone have a chance. And when it was finally done, we took it to be buried in this village that the ancestor had suggested would be a good place. And when it was in the ground, buried at the base of a cola tree, the elders said, well, now what? We want to remember these prayers. This was really important to us. We have to keep this alive. And I said, well, I don't, you know, what does that look like for you? And so what they came up with was to build a peace hut, which is traditionally called a palaver hut, in that village. It's a round, open, walled structure where people go to resolve conflict and to pray and to, you know, come together. And so they wanted to have a peace hut in the village where they could come and remember all of this. So we raised the money, they built the peace hut. The peace hut was built, then they said, well, this is all great, but what we really need is a well because we don't have fresh water. So again, we raised the money, they dug the well. And now life has returned to that village. They can grow crops, they can, you know, many things are happening from that. But the former general I mentioned, he and his team now, we've actually built 4 peace huts in conflict-prone regions of Liberia. He and his team do peace-building trainings with ex-combatants, former child soldiers, and we have an amazing woman now on the team who is one of the leaders of the women's peace movement and whose specialty is teaching people in communities how to resolve conflict inside the peace huts. So instead of going through the very corrupt judicial system, they go to the peace huts and take matters into their own hands in a very skillful way. So there's many more things that have happened. They now have their own NGO called the Peace Hut Alliance, and it goes on. They're now going to start farming with the ex-combatants, farming the land for the communities to grow their own food. And, you know, so it's like a whole ongoing project. And that is because those people made very strong prayers. And, you know, it came about, you know, so that's one example.
That's such a great example. I mean, the ripples from that Earth Treasure Vase practice in that community and throughout that region, it's extraordinary. There's nothing subtle about this. It's very, very grounded.
It's true.
Beautiful, Cynthia. I wish it wasn't over because I want to go with you, but I guess there's a new generation.
No, there's a new generation. I have 23 more vases left on my altar that have yet to be determined. There's many that are already in process going out, but more to come. And so that's the next chapter. Yeah.
How exciting.
Yeah.
Well, before we end, you want to just tell us what this upcoming journey is for many people who are listening and watching us right now. It will have already happened, but in real time, it's about to happen. Where are
Yeah.
you going, and what exactly is the vision for this journey?
Well, I'm going back to Nepal. I'm going back to where it all started. And I haven't been back to this cave since I met the old Lama. And I really want to go. I'm going with the Lama Sultram, who's my great spiritual friend and colleague in this. He will be guiding me and a small group of people. We've been filming a lot along the way from time to time, and we will be filming this. So we'll see how that goes. But the very interesting thing, two really interesting things, is that when I met the old Lama, his daughter was basically his caretaker and helper. She was in her 50s at that time, and had actually lived there in this hermitage cave since she was 19 or 20 years old. So she is still there. And he died the year after I met him, and she stayed on. So according to Lama Sultram, she's a great practitioner, a great yogini. She has to be. She spent her entire life in retreat. And if he has said to me, Lama Sultram, if she were a man, everyone would be flocking to her. Because she's very realized, and she's an amazing teacher. But because she's a woman, nobody cares. And she's completely ignored, more or less completely ignored. So I want to go and honor her. And I think it's very interesting that it's shifted from the old wise man in the cave to the old wise woman in the cave. And I think that is very apropos of the times that we're living in. And I feel like that's a big shift in terms of what has evolved in this practice over the last 30 years that I've been carrying it on. We've really gone from the whole idea of individual awakening to collective awakening. For me, the practice has shifted from really realizing the limitations of the patriarchal power structure that has governed this particular, spiritual lineage. And I think that's true all over the world, that, we're waking up, and we're waking up to our relationship to the earth herself. And I, for one, have felt that the notion of taking refuge, as we do in Buddhism, in the three jewels, which are considered the Buddha, the teacher, the Dharma, the teachings, and the Sangha, the community, it's a bit fraught when you think of the power structure and the way in which the Dharma is passed on, generally speaking. And for me, that's shifted to really realizing that the earth is the greatest source of refuge. And the earth is such an amazing teacher, such an embodiment of community. It's all there. The teacher, the teachings, and the community. So I have actually kind of gone from being a very full-on Buddhist to being kind of a renegade, I don't know what, to call myself, because the Earth Treasure Vases have brought me into such a deep relationship to the earth as a living being, and listening for 30 years, the call of the earth, and how do we respond, and what do we do to get ourselves out of the way and make a path forward in a new way. And so in terms of this journey, I'm curious to share this with her and to see what sort of a response she might have, what she sees. I know she's a diviner and an astrologer, and I'd be very curious about that. We're also going to go to the monastery where Charak Rinpoche taught for 50 years when he wasn't in retreat. And it's called Tolugompa. It's the second oldest monastery in Nepal. It's the seat of Lama Sultram and his family lineage. That's how they all knew each other. And Lama Sultram has recently inherited the lineage from his father, who passed away. And the interesting thing there is that Lama Tsultrim basically lost the monastery during the earthquake in Nepal. It was virtually destroyed. But a lot of the paintings and the key things remain, but the buildings need to be rebuilt. And he had also he established a center in Louisiana in the 9th Ward of New Orleans, which was destroyed by Hurricane Katrina.
Wow.
So he's lost one center to Hurricane Katrina, his monastery to this earthquake. And if it weren't for him, I wouldn't be sitting here today, because he's the one who guided me to meet his teacher, Chak Rinpoche, where I received this practice. He oversaw the crafting of the vases, everything. So I want to give back, and I'm asking for whoever's interested to help us get involved in rebuilding this monastery. And I think there's a kind of an opportunity there to bring a revitalization. And Lama Tsultrim is very open to this whole notion of the earth as a source of refuge and the feminine. And so it's just one way that I can, thank him, and we can all carry it forward. So that's in a nutshell. There's so much more to share, but I know it's a lot.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So if people wanted to check out your work, what's your website?
It's earthtreasurevase.org.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Oh, Cynthia, yay. So go in peace, my friend, and may your vessel be open so that whatever prayers need to be placed will be.
Yeah. Thank you, Mirabai.
Thank you.
Lovely to have this chance to share the path with you, and I will be thinking of you as I make my way, and look forward to sharing much more on the return. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Bless you, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you.